What's going on, everybody? If you run your boat in saltwater or brackish water, then you are going to be fighting the fight against salt and buildup. And if you run your boat a lot, hopefully you don't hit ground too often. But eventually that does happen, and even if you don't hit ground, if you are frequently going through shallower water, like say a buoy netter or a flats boat, then salt, sand, shells, mud, grass, and other debris can build up in the engine's cooling passages. Now, the two things that we have here are not made to clean out physical debris from your engine. But in order to explore this topic today by comparing these two products designed to clean out salt and buildup, we need to break down the situation so that you will know what situation relates to you personally and the situation that you will eventually find yourself in at some point in time during your boating career. Now, we already have videos on overheating boat engines, engines that are not peeing, and an engine's cooling system that we'll link to in the description for you for a little refresher. But our main concern is how to lessen the chance of having to deal with an overheating issue. What we've got here is some stuff called Salt Away and Salt Off. Both of these are concentrated, but we've got one bottle of the Salt Away that comes pre-mixed and ready to use. What these do is they actually break down the salt accumulation and allow it to be washed right off of the surface you are using them on. And we're going to do a little comparison between the two by cleaning off the inside of a charge air cooler, which is basically just a heat exchanger that cools down the air. But we've taken the ends off the exchanger where you can see a pretty good amount of salt buildup on each end of the cooler. Now, it's important to understand something about stuff like this, because what they do is they actually break down the salt chemically, but they don't really break down other debris like seashells, sand, or other physical objects. So for a practical application, let's say you are cruising around in your boat and drive the boat straight into a sandbar, then proceed to power through that sandbar, sucking up sand like a Hoover vacuum cleaner. This stuff is not going to clean out that kind of junk from the engine in order to cure an overheating condition. Whenever we suck up a bunch of junk into the engine, or over time where we'll get buildup of sand and shells and other stuff, this kind of an issue can only be resolved by pulling apart the engine in order to dig out and scrape out the debris, in order to free up the cooling passages of the engine. So if you know that you've packed the head full of sand or you've got a fairly older engine, then be prepared to pull it apart if you've got an overheating problem, where the chemical salt products aren't going to help you. But where they are going to help you is before that buildup has been allowed to accumulate in the engine. And a little side note, we're going to stick to using the Salt Away or Salt Off stuff. I know that some people like to pour muriatic acid down into the engine to try and get rid of buildup, but we're not really a fan of that. You can do more damage with stuff like that than you can really curing or fixing the engine. Just my own personal opinion on that subject before it gets mentioned in the comments section below.
Gunpowder, the tobacco.
Both of these are concentrated, and you can get them with one of these dispensers that you just hook up to your flush fitting on the engine, then hook up the garden hose and turn it on to flush out the engine. And that's pretty much it on the directions and application of this stuff. But for today, we're just going to put them into spray bottles and try them out on a couple of salty items that we've got laying around the shop here, like this boost control valve here that has obviously seen some better days. Now, just spraying the salt, you can get the salt off by spraying it down with the spray setting on the nozzle. But if we put the bottle on the stream setting, it works a lot better to actually knock the salt off. Something that you'll notice when comparing the West Marine Salt Off to the Salt Away, the Salt Away is a way darker blue color, whereas the Salt Off has a lighter blue color to it. I don't know if that means that the Salt Away is more concentrated or what even makes it the blue color in the first place. I'm not really sure. But if we're just spraying down something like this engine block, where it's just mainly salt, it's a lot more effective than what you would think. A lot of times if you use something like a brake cleaner or a contact cleaner, it will knock off the salt residue, but then once the cleaner dries out, you'll see that white residue mark return back to the block, like it's embedded into the pores of the block. The salt spray seems to get rid of that though. It also depends on how thick the salt is as well. You can see in certain spots where you would still need to brush some of the salt off if you are trying to conserve some of the cleaner. But looking under the block here, you can see all the salt that is left behind here in piles. But onto that caked on salt though, I think the stuff works the best when you spray it down with the spray setting and then you use a pick or a wire brush or something to pick out the chunks, then spray it down again with the salt spray to break it up and make it easy to come off. Then when you spray it again with the salt off, it'll really clean off the metal a lot more. Now for the comparison of the Charge air cooler sides and the salt off versus the salt away, before putting the salt spray on, we'll clean it off a little bit with the contact cleaner, just so we can get a better comparison. This side we're using the West Marine Salt Off concentrate, and we've sprayed it down. It doesn't really break up the salt very fast, but this is a lot of salt buildup that's heated up and caked onto the cooler. Which brings us back to talking about how you've still got to use a pick or a brush in order to get the heavy deposits off. But with the salt off on the salt, it really does make the stuff break off in chunks that start to disintegrate as we scrape them off and add more salt off to them, which speeds up cleaning something like this out a lot quicker. And leaves you with a way cleaner item than when you started. And I think it works better than contact cleaner does, plus it's cheaper than the contact cleaner when compared by volume and how far a bottle will go for you. On the other side, again, this stuff is caked on and burned onto the cooler here. And I forgot to clean this side off with the contact cleaner first, but the first thing you notice is again how much darker of a blue color the salt away is compared to the salt off. But I just soaked the cooler with the concentrate and then took the wire brush to the salt, and it really does get through the salt and literally disintegrates it. In less than a minute, we're about 50% through the salt here on this side. Granted, it does take some scraping and some brushing to get all the salt off, but all in all, the solution works great at really breaking up the buildup in whatever you find it in. In my opinion, in comparing the two different solutions, to me it seems like the salt away is more concentrated and works faster. But we do use both of them because they both work great, and if you're running either one of these through your engine a few times a year, depending on how often you run your boat, I doubt you'll ever have an issue with salt buildup in your cooling passages. But if you pack the engine with sand though, that's a completely different story, and that will have to get picked out just like we did here. Now let us know what your experience has been in the comments section below. Have you ever used a salt away product like this, or do you flush your engine with a solution? Don't forget to visit us at bornagainboating.com for more helpful boating content. Thank you all for hanging out with us this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week.